here in the studio, Dr. Antoinette Tsiboe-Darko is Executive Director of the Dankwa Institute. She also happens to be the Deputy General Secretary of the NPP. Doc, it's a pleasure to meet you. Good morning.
Good morning, Kojo. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. On the phones, he needs very little introduction. Felix Kwakye-Ofosu is former special aide to John Dramani Mahama. Felix, it's good to have you on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. Except that I am still special aide to John Dramani Mahama.
Of course you are. Yes. Thank you for the correction. Thank you. Okay. So listen, let's get straight into it. I'm dying to hear your thoughts, Dr. Tsiboe-Darko. The NDC has chosen a female running mate, and she came out fighting yesterday. Surely that must have been quite gratifying to see.
I don't think for me it's surprising. The NDC chose Prof in 2020, and I was hoping for for them to be consistent, and commitment, because I will not deny the fact that I have an academic link with her, or an academic, bond with her. I see her at functions and I speak to her. She's a professor. So for me, it's good. Yeah. I don't think my comment on that will be, it is more about her speech, what we both stand for, and etc. I think that's where I differ a lot.
Well, she had lots to say, throwing some punches here and there, talking about how she will never describe herself as a driver's mate. Talked about the gaping hole that is that should have been the National Cathedral, and many other issues. If you want to take them one by one, I'm happy to hear your initial thoughts on what she had to say.
So my initial thoughts on what Professor Jane had to say is about the fact that you go to your track record. When you are promising people things, you look at your track record and you ask yourself, will you be able to deliver? And when I look at excerpts from Professor's handing notes in 2017, I see a lot of deficiencies and I see a lot of issues. And perhaps we should speak to how she's going to fix those things, or if she comes back, will not repeat those things. And then you can talk about what you are now promising the good people of Ghana. So when you are a minister and you don't look at things like feeding grants, you leave it unpaid. For me, even the part that, and as a researcher, I do a lot of research on persons with disability, where you don't give feeding grant to special schools, that is schools for deaf and dumb, from 2014 to 2016, that's 2 whole years of denying persons with disability their grant money. When you look at capitation grant that wasn't paid 2014 to 2016, school supplies 2014 to 2016, the government owed supplies. These are things that existed in your time, and you are speaking to the fact that you do more things. Okay, tell us also that you will make sure that some of these things that happened during your time as minister will not be repeated. We seem to want to keep a track record of what people have done. And of course, a jab and the pointing to the fact that I will not be a driver's mate. I think that is very highly opinionated. It depends on you and how you see yourself as coming in. Perhaps Professor has had a lot of discussion with flag bearer, ex-President John Mahama, and they have discussed this thing about the fact that when they come, he's going to make her take the lead. You see, we need to be very clear and specific about what our Constitution says. Our Constitution gives executive and absolute power to the President. Decision-making is the bane of the President. But if the President is going to come and step aside and say that he's going to give power and absolute authority and executive powers to his vice president. And that's what gives.
Is that what they
said? She
said
says she won't be a driver's mate and that she will be the one who will make decisions and take on and etc. I don't know if that is stemming from the fact that there's been some exchange or whatever it is. But in my opinion, we also need to be very careful about how strongly we come out. At the end of the day, my research and my posts, I've done a lot of research, both looking at socioeconomic factors that influences voter choices and etc. One of the things that I have come to realize is the presidential candidate is the one who determines the voter's choice at the end of the day. A lot of reasons for vice presidential candidates being a part of the whole campaign and everything, I've come to realize it's more about party faithful. So to keep your base, to re-energize your base. That's why the vice presidential candidate is not an elected position. You know, it's about
really
party support, party faithful, party who would party accept the person, would, you know. So at the end of the day, when you see voters' choices, I don't see why, you know, the emphasis on voter choices vis-a-vis vice presidential candidate has become such a huge debate.
The NPP had a vice presidential candidate who was credited with being very influential in your victory of 2016, Dr. Bawumia. It is suggested that he really made the difference.
It is suggested, it is researched, it is proven.
Does that not... So are you saying that research suggests, or research points to the fact that Dr. Bawumia made no difference?
Dr. Bawumia made a difference. And that's why I asked you that, is it suggested, it is researched, or it is proven?
So what does your research tell us? Did he make a difference or not?
He made a difference. Okay. He made a huge difference. And as I said, the difference is in your party base. So you know that for every party, or what research shows is that there's strong determinants of voter choices, party affiliation, campaign promises. Of course, the candidate is always a thing. Now, looking at these three factors, party faithful, whenever you look at, you disaggregate the variable party faithful and why party faithful's acceptance of who the candidates are, both at the parliamentary level and at the presidential level, is such a strong determinant. So that's what I'm speaking to. That when you take vice presidents within your party, it's always a strong determinant. So Professor Naana Opoku Agyemang, acceptable in the NDC, is a strong determining factor. That's what I'm speaking to. Right. Same as it occurred for us, you know.
Okay. Let's bring in Felix Kwakye-Ofosu. Felix, I think before we heard Prof yesterday, there are many who might have thought that she didn't have this in her. We certainly didn't see this in the last campaign. What changed?
Well, nothing has changed. I'm also not sure what exactly is meant by we didn't think she has it in her. Essentially, yesterday, she spoke about the state of our country and what it is that she thinks the NDC must do to improve the situation. So perhaps what has changed is the extent of deterioration in the quality of life, in the governance of our country. And so perhaps highlighting it in a more frontal and robust fashion is what has got people talking. Before I proceed any further, I think it's important to respond briefly to some of the things that Dr. Tsiboe-Darko has raised.
Briefly, please.
It is clear that she is channeling MPP speaking points on Professor Opoku Agyemang. I've seen a number of them flying about. And when you read what they say are negatives associated with Professor Opoku Agyemang, and you relate that to the current situation, with the greatest respect to Dr. Tsiboe-Darko and the MPP, it pales into complete insignificance. So they speak about some areas here or some areas there. They say, for instance, that there were some areas with the capitation grant 2 years. To begin with, I am surprised that anybody in the MPP who has an understanding of governance would even attempt to hold Professor Opoku Agyemang with these things. To begin with, there is no minister in government that makes payments. It is the duty of the finance ministry to mobilize resources and pay for government commitments. So when you say that the Minister of Education has not paid capitation grants, that is completely false. You understand me? The second point is that there has never been a time where government has not had arrears to pay. So 1 or 2 years arrears is something that you will find in every government. When the MPP leaves office, I am absolutely certain that we will find arrears running into several years. However, if you compare the education sector today to what Professor Opoku Agyemang left, you find that she had a much, much better track record than the NDC can point to. For instance, under the MPP, capitation grants have been in arrears for up to 4 years, in some instances 8 terms. They were unable to print textbooks to cover the new curricula that they themselves introduced. For up to 4 years, for 4 straight years, they had not printed textbooks. Your station has been at the forefront of highlighting the plight of school children who do not have access to desks to sit on. I have seen some of the very harrowing pictures that you put out. At the last reckoning, and I read the report put out by 8 education-related civil society organizations, and they point out that up to about 1.3 million Ghanaian school children do not have access to desks to sit on, and so they sit either on cement blocks on the bare floor or lie on their stomach to receive instruction. She speaks about arrears owed to food suppliers. Only a few months ago, we saw how caterers and food suppliers stormed the buffer stock company in demand for hundreds of millions of Ghana cedis owed them in arrears because government had failed to pay. Today we see the problems associated with senior high school education, where the children are simply unable to get adequate feeding. And I could go on and on and on and on. So for any MPP communicator to think that the way to take the shine of what happened yesterday is to recount minor setbacks under the NDC.
Felix,
and hello.
Yeah, you characterize them as minor, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is, yes, she didn't make these payments, but it's not as bad as your opponent. So you admit that
the minister, the Minister of Education, that is important because you are sitting on a station that is supposed to educate the public. The Minister of Education does not make payments.
Right, let's actually educate the public, Felix.
Yes.
Are you saying that ministers have no say in which of the bills of their sector get paid? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I have been in government, because I'm sure you followed governance. And anybody who has done that knows that if you say that the Minister of Education has not made payments, it is not an accurate statement to make. Understand me? No minister makes payment, because the way government functions, it is the finance ministry that gathers resources and meets government's commitments. No sector minister does payments. So the Minister of Education does not pay teachers, for instance. The Minister of Health does not pay health workers. So it is the Ministry of Finance that does that.
Yes.
So Felix, if you go and write sticking points and say that Professor Opoku Agyemang has not paid caterers, it is not an accurate statement. That is what you call propaganda.
Right.
It is important
Felix,
that we are accurate and specific
in fact,
the claim that we make.
It is important that we are accurate, Felix. So in the interest of accuracy, what Dr. Tsiboe-Darko said was that in Professor Opoku Agyemang's handover notes, these items were not paid for. Now I'm asking you, are you saying that ministers have no say in which bills of their sector get paid?
The way government works is this. There is a ministry that is charged with mobilizing government resources. Once they do that, they must allocate these resources to various ministries to undertake their projects. So a sector minister, say Minister of Education, Minister of Health, they are not the ones who pay. That is why when people get their salaries, it comes from the Controller and Accountant General's Department, because they are an agency under the Finance Ministry that does those payments. So it is not accurate to say that the Minister of Education has not paid teachers, for instance, or has not paid caterers, for instance. But of course, once she is superintending the ministry and she is leaving office, she will indicate in the handing over notes that these arrears are outstanding. Dr. Tsiboe-Darko knows this. It is such a basic concept and principle in governance that we don't have to belabor it at all. The other issue I'm making is that as for arrears, every government will leave arrears, because the way government works itself is such that bills pile up to a point before they are paid. But if you want to see whether one minister performed better than the other, you look at the extent of the arrears. Arrears of 7 million Ghana cedis cannot be the same as arrears of 350 million Ghana cedis, for instance. If you tell me that capitation grants have not been paid for 2 terms, that is not the same as having capitation grants not paid for between 6 to 8 terms. When Professor Opoku Agyemang was education minister, she supplied textbooks. In fact, she made sure that at basic level, each student had access to 4 textbooks. Under the MPP, for 4 years, they were unable to print textbooks to give to basic school pupils. So her record at the education ministry is stellar. It is far better than anything this government is doing. So I needed to clarify that for you. The other issue too about whether or not her statement about not being the mate is the right thing to say is something that we need to ponder over. To begin with, Dr. Bawumia's effort to project himself as a mate to the president was steeped in dishonesty and a lack of integrity. And you rightly pointed out to Dr. Tsiboe-Darko that Dr. Bawumia was influential in the campaign. No, he was not just influential in the campaign. In fact, he was presented by both the then flag bearer, President Akufo-Addo, and himself as the panacea to our economic difficulties. Once they came into government, he was elevated to the position of the head of the economic management team, which is the team that formulates and supervises the implementation of government's economic policy. And then, in the course of this administration, both President Akufo-Addo, multiple MPP leaders, and Dr. Bawumia himself have sought to credit him with what they claim to be gains made in the management of the economy at some point. So when the economy tanks, and we have a situation where it is on the verge of collapse, we default on our debts, the Ghana cedi dollar exchange ratio goes out of control, so that today you will need 14 cedis to get $1. We have a situation where we have hyperinflation, which at some point stood at 54%. We have a situation where interest rates are over 30%. We have a situation where our credit ratings have plummeted. And we have a situation where we have failed to pay 1.3 million domestic bondholders. Dr. Bawumia cannot suddenly turn around and claim that he knows nothing about these developments and that he was merely taking instruction from the president and so cannot be held accountable. The day he did that, he told the people of Ghana that he lacks the requisite integrity and the ability to take responsibility such that he cannot be entrusted with the presidency of this country. That is the point that Professor Opoku Agyemang sought to make yesterday. As for the fact that the president wields executive power, everybody knows it. But we were not the ones who told Dr. Bawumia himself and President Akufo-Addo to tell us that it was he who was going to manage the Ghanaian economy. So if we have this knowledge at the back of our minds and the economy goes into a state of complete disarray, it is appropriate that we hold Dr. Bawumia accountable. Now, what you would have expected him to do was to take responsibility for the problems so that if he goes forward to put out what he perceives to be solutions that he can apply to addressing them, then he can be taken seriously. But if he takes flight, does not want to be held accountable for what has happened, and tries to put a distance between himself and the very government that he is the number 2 man in, he will create an integrity deficit for himself. Look at the issue of e-levy, for instance. When the e-levy was passed, for up to 2 to 3 years, Dr. Bawumia remained silent. He did not offer a whimper as to whether or not he disagreed or not. The moment he decided to contest to become MPP flag bearer, he suddenly realizes that he must indicate that he disagrees with e-levy, and then he promises that he will scrap it. Meanwhile, he is the head of an economic management team that has imposed scores of taxes on the Ghanaian people. And this is creating a huge burden for many Ghanaian households. So the issue of mates to a driver is one that Dr. Bawumia brought upon himself, and he has done considerable damage to his own reputation.
Okay.
The final point I want to raise before perhaps you come in again is the issue of whether or not Professor Opoku Agyemang made a difference in 2020 or will make a difference going forward. One just needs to look at the results of the 2020 elections to realize what significant gains the NDC made. In fact, the performance we put up in 2020, although it fell short of our expectation. We wanted to win. Indeed, there are those who believe that we actually won, but for some manipulations that were against us. But if you look at the results as put out by the East, you find that for the first time, a party that had gone into opposition for just 4 years was able to claw back such substantial ground as to almost take control of parliament. In 2016, we had a deficit of around 900,000. We closed that to 500,000. In the central region where Professor Opoku Agyemang hails from, when we went into the 2020 elections, we had only 4 parliamentary seats. At the time the elections were over, this had moved to 13. So these are significant jumps in our fortune.
But how do you know how much of this is down to Professor Opoku Agyemang? How do you know?
Well, I know that I was a candidate in the elections in 2020 in the Tsiboe-Darko constituency. So I'm aware of the work that she did in the central region to shore up our parliamentary votes. And it's reflected in the results that we had. Now, let me talk about Dr. Bawumia. Dr. Tsiboe-Darko spoke about Dr. Bawumia's acceptability within the MPP vis-a-vis that of Professor Opoku Agyemang. Now, at the time that Dr. Bawumia became MPP running mate, he did not even have a party card. And this is a matter that we are all familiar with. Indeed, the likes of Japan and Co. mounted strong resistance to Dr. Bawumia's nomination because they contended that he was not a member of the MPP. In fact, if you look at the results of the MPP primaries held last November, you find that there are significant questions that emerged over Dr. Bawumia's own gravitas within the MPP. Because this was the establishment candidate who had substantial support and resources from the establishment. In other words, the government machinery. And yet, he failed to pull even 55% in the votes. And this raises substantial doubts about his own acceptability within his party. Because what you have is that, if you look at President Akufo-Addo, for instance, he pulled in excess of 90% of the votes in the last primaries that he stood before he became president. I think in 2014 or so. But the same cannot be said of Dr. Bawumia at this particular moment. Professor Opoku Agyemang and the polls show that an overwhelming majority of NDC supporters endorsed her candidacy. That's why there was little to no resistance when she was nominated, especially once again to run as the running mate to President Mahama in the 2024 election. So there's no doubt about Professor Opoku Agyemang's suitability and acceptability.
Felix, you're comparing somebody who was appointed a running mate to somebody who was elected a flag bearer. What's the correlation?
Yeah, but again, of course, the only way you know that the person has acceptability is the performance he puts up when presented to party folk for endorsement as flag bearer. And the reason why I raised that point was to debunk the theory propounded by Dr. Tsiboe-Darko that somehow Dr. Bawumia has widespread support within the MPP.
Then he should have got zero. I mean, Felix, you are comparing peaches and oranges here. I'm surprised at you. I wish you would put Professor to the pool.
But
you are actually retracting now.
He was never going to get zero in the election.
No, hold on a second.
Felix,
my question is, if you look at Dr. Bawumia's 61% that you talk about, he's had more percentage of votes than any NPP flag bearer aspirant on the first try, isn't it?
No, but Winston,
Felix,
we are talking about a candidate who is seen or was seen as the establishment candidate, the one that the entire government machinery backed. We are also talking about the expanded delegates base of the MPP. In previous times, you had about 1,000, 300, 1,500 people gathered in one place, and this was creme de la creme, who then decided who became flag bearer. As since the MPP delegates base was expanded, at least after 2014, if I'm not mistaken, you find that President Akufo-Addo got overwhelming support from MPP delegates. In one election, I think he got about 92 or 93%.
94% in 2014.
Absolutely. In fact, in 2020, nobody dared to contest him. But the same cannot be said of Dr.
He was
Bawumia.
a sitting president.
Yes, well, fine, no problem. But there was nothing that prevented anybody from contesting him. So to the extent that nobody wanted to do that showed that he had widespread acceptability within the MPP. But if you have a situation where a vice president who has been the man in charge of the economy for 8 years steps up to contest for the flag bearership slot of the MPP, he has substantial support from the government machinery. Just about every key government official was lending support to him. We know that by extension, he also came by enormous resources. And yet, when delegates of the MPP were made to decide between him and others, he could not pull even 63, 64%. It means that almost 40% of MPP delegates do not think that Dr. Bawumia merits that slot.
Okay.
And I'm talking about the expanded base, not the previous arrangements where only a few people were selected to go and vote for the flag bearer. So it shows that Dr. Bawumia has a significant deficit in terms of acceptability within the MPP rank and file. Right. And that is the point that I am making.
Okay, Felix. Let's come back into the studio. And Doc, I know you'll probably want to respond to a few things. I have a question of my own as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
One of the things that is quite interesting about our current situation, I mean, it must really upset, party officials like yourself, that after almost 8 years in power, our country is in a situation where the party we rejected 8 years ago seems to be able to generate such positive feelings around their ticket compared to yours. It must be quite upsetting.
Could you? So I'm a firm and an ardent believer in the factors that determine, elections and voter choices. And I told you when I came here that I speak from a pure research perspective. So when I was listening to Honorable Felix Kwakye-Ofosu on phone, I thought that speak with more statistics, data, figures, research. Perceptions are varied, and a lot of times perceptions is what drives what we all discuss and talk about.
And do.
But data will do as well. But data is what matters. Now, Kojo, the fact is that within the Ghanaian political environment and what we have seen, a democracy for 32 years, the two dominant parties have been the NDC and the MPP. And then in between that, we have the floating voters. Now, the floating voters, we all know, that determine the election. What would make a voter decide? Incumbency is one of the things that affects voter choices. So yes, definitely, at this point in time, we've been in power for 8 years. There is the incumbency aspect on what you see. The fact that the NDC has positive, for me, it is not about, for me, it doesn't tell me anything about what will happen on December 7th. It rather tells us that as a party in power, as a government, people still want you to do more. So what you are doing now, do even more. If you want to convince the good people of Ghana, if you want to tell the Ghanaian voter to retain, you need to do more. And also, could you remember we have this 8-year thing?
If I may clarify,
that seems to
if
be.
I may clarify,
yes.
Doc, are you saying that the strategy of the MPP is to tell the voter that if they vote for you, they will get more of what you've given them so far?
The strategy of, yes.
They will get more of this.
Whatever MPP is doing now,
the voter will get more of it.
The voter will get more. Okay. Not more of what we are doing, but in terms of the fact that the perception of voters is that currently there are things that we are not pleased with. We want you to do more. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So there may be things that we are not pleased with. We want you to do more. And as I said, each party has a base. Now remember that as long as each party has a base. Now at every 8 year, what we see a lot of research showing is that at the end of every 8 years, you do get a lot of apathy also within your party. So it tends to also influence the way voter choices and perception goes. And remember one thing, if your percentage is dropping, the other party's support base is the same. It means that you tend to get less, positive indicators. So there's an 8 year, there's incumbency, there's apathy, all of these factors contribute to what you see. But above all things, perceptions, as you just said, what people see, it tends to trend and influence. And I think that for me has been the worrying fact. Where do we come to a point where we analyze information, we add data and talk about it properly, and not just, give headlines and statements that tend to, sway the public into believing things. I think these are all factors that we must look at. You actually made me lose my thought on some of the response that I wanted to give to, but I think it's fine. It's okay. But I think mainly what I would have thought that he would concentrate on was to highlight and give us a lot of factors and reasons why Professor Naana Opoku Agyemang is the ideal candidate to be the NDC's winning ticket. But he's rather gone into a backlash on Vice President Bawumia and what he has done and what he hasn't done. He's the flag bearer. Okay, so let's put our two flag bearers on the same page, and then if that's what you want to do. But I think that he's putting an argument that I really couldn't grasp at a point. I was wondering, and then he's also saying Dr. Tsiboe-Darko is theorizing. No, I haven't theorized. For me, when you want to theorize on something, you collect data, you collect evidence, you prove or you disprove the fact. I don't think I've gotten to that point. What I kept saying, and I think you even mentioned it, is that I look at the data, I look at facts, I look at what has been presented to me, and this is a conclusions and probable, the decisions that I think could have influenced some of the things. And I emphatically said, as soon as I started, that I'm happy the NDC has been consistent. I relate to Professor Jane as an academic, and I congratulate her for making it a second time. As a female, I think this is a good mark in our politics, especially when we come to discuss gender and politics. So I said all of that. Unfortunately, he didn't even talk about all of that. But what I said was, talk about what you also did. Leadership is about what you have done, how effective you were in a specific leadership position. Use that as an example and as a leverage to tell us that this is what you will do. That is all I said. I said, tell us about some of these things. And if you are saying that we should run away from the fact that she was a minister for education and therefore she wasn't the one going to determine what was paid and it was a Ministry of Finance, then you, the same person, now tells us that Dr. Bawumia is also running away from the fact that responsibility. And I said, then go and read the Constitution. See where executive powers lie. See who makes the final decision at the final moment. And don't let us try to mar it because of politics. Let's look at the facts and the information and tell ourselves that this is what actually happened. So in your handing over notes, this is what you left. And I'm questioning that and saying, as a leader, tell us then what you will do to make sure that some of these things won't happen again. But don't go into a whole new way of promises. We are in and you just said it yourself, we are in a situation where everybody is now being marked by your performance. You want to see, what have you done in the past? What are you doing now? What do you then intend to do? So let's not run away from the past. That is what I was saying. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stay with you for this next bit before we go back to Felix. Dumso. Yeah, I mean, look, this is the preoccupation of the nation right now. We don't like it.
No.
And we don't like so many aspects of it, from how we were communicated with to the fact that there seems to be no plan. Right? Now, look, these people who are superintending over the sector, they are in your party. Yeah. Some of them want to become running mates. Honestly, this thing affects us all equally. When my lights go off, so do yours.
Yes.
How do you assess the way Ghanaians have been spoken to and dealt with in this latest Dumso?
You see, one of the things that I always say is, it's always very premature if you come out early to say something and then later you realize that no. I think there's been a lot of unpredictability in the nature of how the Dumso has been. I even tried to, on my own, analyze and say that Is it about a certain specific time of the day? And is that why government, then we must advise government and the ministry then to come out with some load shedding, But consistently, we have come to the decision that it is not about load shedding. It's about a temporal challenge that is being fixed. Communicating this message. Challenge? So yesterday I heard actually I spoke to him as well, the Deputy Minister for Energy, and he's now the board chair for ECG. Herbert Crapper come out to say that it is a challenge and it is being fixed.
Dr.
He said operational challenges and it is being fixed. Now, if we should then go into a stage where the people responsible feel that it is really and deem it necessary, and I really empathize with Ghanaians. I'm a consumer as well, and I empathize with the fact that it kind of upsets your planning if you are not sure of it and etc. But I also think that if you come out with a load shedding plan or that kind of thing, and it is something that is just going to be for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, you also upset people. You actually send people back into a stage where they think, oh, are we going to go into it for the next? No, you also don't want to put dear good people of Ghana through that. So if he's come out with a statement yesterday, today, tomorrow, and he says that within the next few days, weeks, actually head up to end of the month, I think that, yes, every Ghanaian citizen has a right to call the people responsible, the government out, myself, everybody, that come and provide answers for us.
Okay.
And yesterday he made a statement. Let's see what happens in the coming days. I would tell you, let's call out. If that is what has to happen, that is what then has to
Dr.
happen.
Tsiboe-Darko, because you talk about research a lot, so this is the energy sector outlook for 2024, prepared by the Energy Commission of Ghana.
Okay.
Page 15, and it talks about fuel requirements. I'll go to the last one. 2024, the outlook. So this was published in 2023.
Okay.
It was actually telling us what we should expect in 2024. Listen to this. The AXA, so it talks about it, but I'll just read the last paragraph. The AXA plant fuels some of its units using HFO and is expected to operate those as a standby in 2024. The plant will require a total of 341,190 barrels in the year. Light crude oil and diesel would be required as backup fuel for some plants because of anticipated gas supply outages.
Okay.
This is Energy Commission of Ghana. They saw this coming and warned us to purchase fuel in anticipation of gas outages. Today, there's a shortfall of gas. If you speak to Gridco, they will tell you. If you speak to, the players in the sector, they will tell you. Today, it is no longer Gridco that is taking bulk supply off. It is ECG manning the load shedding. How do we say this is something that we didn't know when as far back as 2023, Energy Commission of Ghana was predicting challenges?
On a specific time, did they give a month?
They told you in 2024.
They told you in
and we've seen it happening.
2024.
And mind you, if we say that, we didn't. By December 2023, the players in the energy sector knew that this is something that could happen to us within the first and second quarter. They knew. So, what did they do? Why are we here?
They are
and
fixing
pretending that we didn't know, we didn't see this coming.
That answers a different question.
That answers it.
Yes, the question is, why are we here? Why did this happen? And in fact, they are fixing it, Nokrano. If we are to take what this research is telling us, one tanker of oil will not fix it.
Is that what they said? One tanker of oil that they are bringing?
There's some tanker of oil coming, and they say when it comes.
I'm not privy to that, and I don't know about the tanker of oil.
All right, but
as I said, they're fixing. I wish that you would. I like the fact that you pointed that this is something that was envisaged. And I wish that we could actually get more information on the time period when this was supposed to. Because I don't believe that at the same time they would sit and say that we'll do nothing about it. Obviously, steps were being taken. Things were being done. But it is not about this happening overnight. I said it. And I also explained that we've experienced these power outages, I think over the last 6 to 7 weeks.
Yeah,
it started and then
2 months.
2 months. I've seen about 7 weeks. Okay, so as time went on, it got a little bit enhanced. Yesterday I saw for 24 hours the whole day. So I'm also appealing to the good people of Ghana. Some message has come. Let's see how it is resolved. They said end of this month, in a few weeks. Let's see how it is resolved, please.
All right, Felix, I wonder whether you felt some relief when Herbert Krapper said that this matter will only last a few more days and then the lights should be back on.
Well, it would not be the first time that we've been giving such assurances. I recall the Deputy Minister designate for Energy, is it Collins? He said about a month ago that the problem we're facing was not going to go beyond 2 weeks. But here we are, still firmly steeped in the problem. But I'll come to that. It is important for me to correct this impression once again that Dr. Tsiboe-Darko unfortunately seeks to make. She says that I have not spoken to data, I have not spoken to facts. Yet, in her presentation, all of her presentation, she has not cited one data point to illustrate her own submissions. She has not put out any data that is not controvertible that I have failed to speak to. What she has attempted to do, as other MPP spokespersons have attempted to do, is to wrongly attribute things to Professor Opoku Agyemang in a manner that seeks to detract from her track record. And that is what I corrected. For instance, they have said, and I've heard Dr. Tsiboe-Darko repeat it this morning, that Professor Opoku Agyemang distributed textbooks to basic school pupils, and she left some arrears. And so because of that, she cannot be trusted if she says she will do A, B, C, D. Now, I have sought to correct that misimpression. One, as someone who speaks for the NDC, and two, as someone who was in the government that she served as education minister in, and so understands what happens. If it is a policy of the Minister of Education, and by extension the Ministry of Education, to distribute textbooks to basic school pupils, so that we have a situation where we overturn a deficit of one textbook to 3 basic school pupils, to 1 pupil to 4 textbooks, as we achieved under Professor Opoku Agyemang, then she actually has achieved that objective. She has ensured that Ghanaian school children have textbooks to study with. Now, once she has procured the textbooks, I have told you that the way that government works is that it is the duty of another agency to mobilize the resources and allocate money to her to make payments. So we have to delineate the issue so that people don't go about misinforming people for purposes of political propaganda.
All right.
The policy of the Education Ministry is to share textbooks. She did that. But it is the duty of another agency to make payment for that commitment that she's made. She's put government to. So that is the point that I sought to explain. Now, when it comes to Bawumia, first of all, Dr. Bawumia is sitting vice president. He is an MPP candidate. I reserve the right to criticize him, especially in circumstances where he has failed to live up to expectation. The mention of Dr. Bawumia was in relation to Professor Opoku Agyemang's submission yesterday that she will not, for purposes of political convenience, say that she is a mere meat. In the case of Dr. Bawumia, there is evidence that he appropriated for himself the leadership of the management of the economy. Same as the president. The president has also told us in plain language, at the very least, we remember that in February 2018, President Akufo-Addo stated emphatically, and this was before Parliament, that Dr. Bawumia was the one running the economy, and therefore, if what he perceived at the time to be gains have been achieved, then the credit should go to him. Now, when you make such a declaration, and then it is time for you to contest for the flag bearership of the MPP, and you tell us at a time of economic downturn that you should not be faulted, it creates a credibility crisis. That is what Professor Opoku Agyemang said she will not do. So facts must be separated from propaganda and misinformation. That's all that I have sought to do. But beyond that, Dr. Tsiboe-Darko has not put forward one statistic to back her claims. And Kojo, you have interviewed me on many occasions. You know that statistics are something that I revere in. I love data. Many of my submissions are based on data, if it is required. And there's not one data point that the MPP can cite today that we cannot speak to or correct if they have misquoted. The other issue that you raised about doing so, look, Kojo, the MPP does not have an excuse to put us in doing so for even 1 minute. The first reason for that is their own posturing on the matter when we had that crisis under the NDC. Both President Akufo-Addo and Dr. Bawumia went out there to criticize the government severely and vowed to do better. On that premise alone, Ghanaians cannot tolerate doing so under them, even if it lasted a day. I'm sure this is a principle that everybody would agree with.
Right. Felix, I've got to stop it there because our time is up. I had hoped that you would spend the time on the Dumso, but you had to go back and reiterate a few points. Sadly, that brings us to the end of our time together. But that's only for today. This conversation is only at its beginning. We're certainly going to be getting back into this and talking more. Hopefully, to hear more from our guests, Dr. Antoinette Tsiboe-Darko and Felix Kwakye-Ofosu.